She crossed a continent to marry a man she had never met. She arrived in a Sierra Nevada blizzard, was thrown 1,000 feet down a cliff, and was pulled from the edge of death by three brothers she did not know. And only then, in a cave in the high country with the wind screaming outside, did the eldest brother tell her the truth. The man she had come to marry had been dead for 3 months, and the letters that brought her west had been written by someone else. Sit back, pour yourself something warm, and let me tell you the story of Adelaide Linwood and the three Holloway brothers. The wind did not simply blow that night on the high pass. It screamed. It tore at the granite face of the mountain like a living beast determined to strip the world bare, and on a narrow shelf of stone, barely wide enough to hold a prayer, a young woman from Boston clung to a frozen root with fingers she could no longer feel. Below her stretched 1,000 feet of nothing. Above her, a storm that buried hope under sheets of driving ice. Adelaide Linwood pressed her cheek against the rough granite and tasted blood from the cut above her temple. She had read about the West in books. She had read about the golden light and the endless possibilities and the men who carved their lives from rock and pine. She had never read that the West could kill a woman before she ever saw the face of the man she had crossed a continent to marry. She closed her eyes. She tried to remember her mother's voice. She tried to remember the smell of old paper in the Boston Athenaeum. She tried to remember anything at all that was warm and human and not this terrible empty howling. And somewhere in that howling she heard hoofbeats. If you love stories of the American frontier of love earned in hard country and forged through trial by fire, take a moment to subscribe to this channel and leave a comment telling me where in the world you are listening from tonight. I want to know. Sit back, pour yourself something warm, and let me tell you about Adelaide Linwood, the Boston girl who left everything behind to marry a man she had never met, and about the three Holloway brothers who pulled her off Widow's Ledge on a November night in 1875. 6 months earlier, Adelaide stood at the third-story window of a narrow brick house on Beacon Street in Boston, watching the rain sheet down across the cobblestones. She was 23 years old. Her mother had been dead 5 months. Her father had been dead for 17 years, taken by a railway accident when she was barely 6. The cameo brooch at her throat had belonged to her grandmother on her mother's side, and it was the last thing of any value she owned. The house belonged to her Aunt Prudence Linwood, a sharp-boned woman of 58 who had taken Adelaide in the way a person might take in a stray cat that they did not want and could not bring themselves to drown. Adelaide worked as a clerk at the Boston Athenaeum, the great private library on Beacon Hill, where she cataloged books and helped scholars find references and shelved volumes that would never be touched again until the next century. Her wages were $4 a week. Her mother's medical debts still owed $200 to a doctor who sent letters with increasing frequency. Behind her in the small parlor, her aunt was speaking. The words came at her like cold water. Mr. Hadley has been a widower these 3 years, Adelaide. He owns the largest dry goods establishment on Tremont Street. He is 55 and he has expressed an interest. He has agreed to overlook your circumstances. Adelaide kept her eyes on the rain. And if I refuse, Aunt Prudence, then you will leave this house. I have given a great deal already. I will not give my final years to feeding a girl too proud to take what is offered. There was a long silence. The rain came harder. That night, by the light of a single tallow candle, Adelaide Linwood opened a folded copy of the Matrimonial Times that one of the patrons had left forgotten in the reading room. She had carried it home in her satchel without quite knowing why. Now she ran her finger down the columns of advertisements, and one of them stopped her. Honest man, 26 years of age, 200-acre homestead in Pine Hollow, California territory, seeking literate woman of good character to share frontier life. Passage paid, Owen Holloway. She read the advertisement 3 times. She thought of Mr. Hadley with his thick neck and his wet smile. She thought of the cold hallways of her aunt's house. She thought of the years stretching before her and how each one would feel like the one behind. She took out a sheet of paper, she dipped her pen, and she began to write. The first letter that came back from California was 3 short paragraphs. It was practical. It listed the amount of timber on the property, the number of cattle, the distance to the nearest town. It said the winters were hard but not unbearable. It was signed in a heavy, careful hand, Owen Holloway. Adelaide read it by lamplight in her small attic room. She felt a quiet disappointment. She had hoped for something warmer, but she wrote back. She told him about the books she loved. She told him about her mother. She told him that she was not afraid of hard work, only of being invisible. The second letter that came back was different. It was longer. It was written in a different rhythm. It spoke of moonlight on the snow, of the way the pine trees leaned toward each other in the wind, like men sharing a secret of the loneliness of a man who had forgotten the sound of a woman's voice. It asked her what book she was reading. It asked her what she dreamed about when she was not dreaming about leaving Boston. It was signed Owen Holloway, but the hand was different. Adelaide noticed it. She told herself it was only that he had written this one when he was tired or rested or in a different mood. She did not know yet that the second letter and most of the letters that followed had been written by a different man entirely, a man whose name she had not yet learned, a man who would one day pull her off the side of a mountain. For 4 months, they wrote, 22 letters in total. Adelaide tied them with a length of blue ribbon and kept them in the bottom of her trunk. She read them at night when the house was sleeping. She read them when she could not sleep. She began to feel in a way she could not have explained to her aunt or to anyone in Boston that she was being seen, truly seen, for the first time in her adult life. The final letter set the date, the 18th of November, 1875. The stagecoach would let her off at Pine Hollow. He would meet her at the depot. He hoped she would not be disappointed. The handwriting in this last letter was tighter than the others, almost careful, almost guarded. She did not notice. She packed a single trunk, her mother's Bible, her grandmother's cameo, 4 books including a volume of Robert Burns, the blue-ribboned letters, $38 in folded notes hidden in the lining, 3 good dresses, 2 everyday ones, her warmest shawl. That was the sum of her life. On the morning she left, her Aunt Prudence stood in the doorway with her arms crossed and watched her load the trunk into the cab. "You will be back within 6 months," her aunt said. "Broken and ashamed. Do not knock at this door when you come." Adelaide did not answer. She climbed into the cab and did not look back. The journey took 11 days. Train from Boston to Chicago, train from Chicago to Omaha, train from Omaha across the Great Plains where she pressed her face to the window for hours and watched the grass roll on without end, train through the Rockies where the snow on the peaks made her catch her breath, train across the Nevada deserts where the heat through the glass made the cameo at her throat feel like a coal, and finally the great descent through the high passes into California where the Sierra Nevada rose up like a wall of God's own making. At Sacramento, she changed to a stagecoach. The stagecoach driver was an old man with a white beard going yellow at the edges and a buffalo hide coat that looked older than he was. His name was Ezekiel Crowder, and the other passengers called him Old Zeke. He spoke perhaps 4 words to her in the first 3 days of the journey. The other passengers were a traveling preacher named Reverend Hollis with a thin face and watery eyes, a widow in heavy black named Mrs. Gettings, who was going to live with her son in Oregon, and a whiskey merchant named Pomeroy, whose breath made Adelaide turn her head whenever he leaned forward to speak. The first snow began to fall on the morning of the 3rd day out of Sacramento. By afternoon, it was coming sideways. By evening, when they reached the last way station before the high pass, the world was nothing but white. The way station was called Cold Springs. It was a low log building with a sod roof and a single chimney pumping black smoke into the storm. Adelaide stepped down from the coach and her legs nearly gave way. She had been sitting for 9 hours. The cold cut through her wool coat as if she were wearing nothing at all. Inside by the fire, she warmed her hands and tried to remember why she had ever thought this was a good idea. A boy came in from the back. He was perhaps 12 years old. He carried a folded yellow paper. "Telegram," he said, "for a Miss Linwood." Adelaide took it with fingers that were still half numb. She opened it carefully. "We'll meet you at Pine Hollow Depot. Stop, have news to share. Stop, ride safe. The storm is bad. Stop, Caleb Holloway." She read it twice. She read it a 3rd time. Caleb Holloway, not Owen. She lifted her face to look at the boy, but he had already gone back through the rear door. She turned to find Old Zeke standing nearby, packing his pipe with slow, deliberate fingers. He had read the telegram over her shoulder. He did not pretend otherwise. "Holloway," Old Zeke said. He struck a match. Adelaide waited. "There are 4 Holloway boys up at Pine Hollow," he said. "Or there were. I have not been up that way since spring." "What do you mean there were?" Old Zeke pulled on his pipe. He looked at the fire. "Miss Linwood, I have driven this road for 21 years. I make it my business not to know my passengers' affairs, but I will tell you this. The eldest Holloway boy, the one whose name is on that paper, is a man I would not cross. He is honorable. He is hard, and earlier this year he came down off that mountain looking like a man who had buried something. I do not know what, but I know the look. You take care up there." He turned and walked outside, leaving Adelaide standing by the fire with the telegram in her hand and a coldness in her chest that had nothing to do with the storm. The stagecoach left Cold Springs at dawn the next morning. The snow was still falling. The horses were nervous. Old Zeke sat hunched forward on the box, his shoulders square against the wind. The road climbed. It climbed for 2 hours, switchback after switchback, the canyon falling away on the right and the granite rising on the left. The world narrowed to a tunnel of white. The other passengers were silent. Reverend Hollis prayed under his breath. The widow, Mrs. Gettings, clutched a small carved cross at her throat. Pomeroy, the whiskey merchant, had been drinking from his own product since Cold Springs and now leaned against the window with his eyes closed. Adelaide held the telegram folded inside her glove. She thought about the name, Caleb. She thought about the careful, different handwriting in the second letter and the third and the fifth. She felt something turn in her stomach that she did not yet have a word for. The road rounded a notorious bend that the locals called Widow's Ledge. The wheels found a patch of black ice hidden under fresh snow. The coach slewed sideways. Old Zeke shouted something the wind tore away. The horses pulled hard against the harness. There was a long, terrible second where the world tilted and then the right rear wheel went over the edge. The coach door never properly latched in. The cold swung open. Adelaide felt herself thrown into nothing. She rolled. She struck stone. She rolled again. Her shoulder hit something that gave way with a sound like a pistol shot, and pain bloomed white behind her eyes. Her hands clawed at the frozen ground. Her fingers found a root, an old gnarled pine root jutting from the cliff face, and she closed on it and held. And then there was silence, or what passed for silence in a storm, the wind, the hiss of snow against rock, and far below the dreadful crashing tumble of the coach as it broke itself apart on the rocks of the canyon floor 1,000 feet down. Iron and timber and screaming horses, and then nothing. Adelaide opened her eyes. She was lying on a narrow shelf of granite jutting out from the cliff face like a broken tooth. The shelf was perhaps 4 feet wide at its broadest. The drop began 2 feet from her body. The road, when she finally dared to look up, was perhaps 30 feet above her. The cliff face between her and the road was sheer, slick with new ice, offering no holds at all. She was alive. She was alone, and no one would come. She tried to push herself up. The pain in her shoulder turned the world gray. She lay back down. She pressed her face against the stone and felt the warm trickle of blood from her temple freeze almost as soon as it left her skin. Time stopped meaning anything. The storm pressed down. The light, what little there was, began to fade. She thought of her mother. She thought she might be dying. She thought with a clarity that surprised her that she did not want to die without ever having truly lived. And then she heard them. Hoofbeats above her on the road, not one set, several, heavy, deliberate slowing, a man's voice deep and carrying through the wind. Pull up here. Boots crunched on snow. Adelaide tried to call out, but her voice came as a whisper. She tried again. The wind took it. A shadow appeared at the lip of the cliff above her, then another, then a third. 3 men framed against the gray sky looking down. They were enormous, tall and broad and silent. One of them carried a coiled rope across his shoulder. One had a rifle slung across his back. One stood with his hand near a holstered revolver. The middle one, the largest, dropped to one knee at the cliff edge. He pushed back the brim of his hat. Adelaide saw for one strange, suspended moment eyes the color of whiskey held to firelight. Steady eyes, eyes that did not flinch at the drop or the storm. Miss, he called down. Do not move, do not look down. I am coming to you. His voice was not loud. It cut through the wind anyway. There was something in it that her body believed before her mind did. She stopped trembling. She held the root and waited. The 2 younger ones above were already in motion. The one with the rope began driving an iron stake into a crack in the granite at the road's edge. The one with the rifle was scanning the slope, reading the rock the way another man might read a page. They worked without speaking. They had done this together before. The big one came over the edge. He did not use the rope. He climbed down the cliff, face by feel fingers and boots, finding holds Adelaide could not see. He moved with the unhurried economy of a man who had spent years on rock. Snow blew around him in white sheets. He did not look up. He did not look down. He came straight to her. When his boots touched the shelf beside her, she realized how truly large he was. He had to crouch to fit on the ledge with her. He smelled of pine pitch and wood smoke and the iron tang of cold sweat. His face up close was weathered, bearded, and serious. The whiskey eyes searched her face without expression. Where are you hurt? My shoulder. Anything else? I do not know. He nodded once. He looked up. The 2 above were lowering a second rope, this one fitted with a wide leather harness. He caught it. He worked the harness around her body with a care that surprised her, threading it under her arms, avoiding her injured shoulder, cinching it tight at her ribs. Listen to me, miss. I am going to lift you. You are going to keep your eyes on my face. You are not going to look down. Do you understand? She nodded. Say it. I understand. He smiled just once, just at the corner of his mouth. It changed his face entirely. Good, he said. He lifted her. The harness took most of her weight, and his arms took the rest. The men above pulled steady, hand over hand. Adelaide kept her eyes on his face. The wind tore at her hair. The cliff face slid past. She did not look down. She did not look down. She did not look down. Hands reached for her at the top. Other hands, strong, gentle hands that lifted her over the lip and onto the road and held her steady while the world spun. The youngest of the three was holding her. He had bright green eyes and unruly auburn hair the color of fox fur, and he was looking at her like a man looking at a small, wounded bird he was afraid to drop. "You are all right," he said. "You are all right now. We have got you." The middle one came over the edge a second later, easy as breath. He took the harness off her with practiced fingers. His eyes were gray and quiet, and they did not quite meet hers. The big one, the one who had come down, came up last on his own rope. When he stood again on solid ground, he did not look winded. He looked at the wreck of the storm and at her in that order, and then he spoke to the two younger men. "Get her out of the wind." They half carried her to a small overhang of rock, 50 feet down the road, where a lean-to of pine boughs had been hastily thrown together. There was a small fire sheltered from the worst of the storm. There were 3 horses tied behind blanketed calm. They had been waiting here. They had known they would find her. The youngest brought her a tin cup. There was hot coffee in it, surprisingly hot, almost too hot to drink. "Slow," he said. "Small sips." She drank. The warmth went through her like a slow tide. The big one crouched in front of her. He took off his glove and pressed 2 fingers gently against her temple where the cut still bled. "Not deep," he said mostly to himself. "Need to bind it." The middle one, the gray-eyed one, was already opening a small leather satchel. He produced a clean strip of linen, a small flask, a needle. He worked beside his brother in silence. They cleaned the cut. They bound her temple. Adelaide watched their faces. They were not identical, but they were brothers. Anyone could see it. The same line of jaw, the same set of the shoulders, different in their coloring, different in their eyes, the same in everything that mattered. She found her voice at last. "Thank you," she said. "Thank you for coming for me. My name is Adelaide Linwood. I am to be married to Mr. Owen Holloway. Did he send you?" The fire popped in the silence that followed. The youngest with the green eyes opened his mouth to say something. The middle one moved his hand a fraction, and the youngest closed his mouth again. The big one did not move at all. He was kneeling in front of her with the linen still in his fingers, and his face had gone perfectly still. The whiskey eyes did not look away. They simply went somewhere else, somewhere a long way off, and then they came back. "Miss Linwood," he said. His voice had dropped lower. "There is something we need to tell you, but not here, not in this wind. We need to get to shelter before the storm gets any worse, or it will be the death of all 4 of us. Will you trust me long enough to get you out of it?" Adelaide looked at the 3 serious faces. She looked at the fire. She looked at the white nothing beyond the lean to where the road had been. She had no choice. "I will trust you," she said. He nodded once. He stood. He turned to the others. "Silas, go ahead. Break trail to the upper hollow. Jonah, ride drag with me. We will not make the ranch tonight. We make for the cave on the spur. Move." The middle one, Silas, mounted in a single fluid motion and rode forward into the storm. The youngest Jonah brought one of the remaining horses around and helped Adelaide into the saddle, mounting up behind her so his body shielded hers from the wind. The big one, Caleb, swung up onto his own horse last and rode close on her other side. They moved off the road and along a cut in the granite she would never have seen on her own. The storm closed behind them like a door. Adelaide rode with her face pressed against Jonah's coat, the smell of leather and snow and something faintly like cedar in her nose. She tried to think. She tried to form a clear thought. The name kept coming back to her. Caleb, the eldest brother, the man who had climbed down the cliff, the man whose handwriting she realized now, with a slow dawning certainty, she had memorized over 4 months of letters that had never been from Owen at all. The cave was not truly a cave. It was a deep recess in the granite, perhaps 15 feet deep, with a ceiling low enough that the men had to stoop. But it faced south, away from the worst of the wind, and the front had been screened over time with a rough wall of stacked stones and pine boughs. There was a fire ring. There was kindling stacked dry against the back wall. There were oilskin bundles tied up high out of reach of animals. This was not a chance shelter. The Holloway brothers had built this place and maintained it year on year for travelers caught by exactly the kind of storm that had nearly killed her. A good man keeps his word. A good man keeps a shelter ready for those that come behind. She did not know yet that those were the words their father had taught them, the words they would one day repeat to her like a prayer. Silas built the fire. He had it crackling within minutes, and the cave warmed almost at once. Jonah saw to the horses, leading them into the back of the recess where they stood with their heads down, steaming content. Caleb took her cloak and her bonnet and shook the snow from them and laid them on a flat stone near the fire to dry. Then he set about pouring water from a canteen into a small iron pot to heat. He had not yet looked at her again. Adelaide sat near the fire with a wool blanket over her shoulders and her injured arm cradled in her lap and waited. The pain in her shoulder was a steady white throb. The cut on her temple itched under its bandage. Her hair had come loose from its pins and hung wet around her face. Jonah came and crouched beside her with another tin cup, this one of broth from a small pot Silas had set over the fire. She drank. He stayed close, watching her drink, watching her color come back. "You are going to be all right, Miss Linwood," he said quietly. "You are safe here. We have weathered worse than this in this hole." She managed a small smile. "Thank you." "Jonah Holloway," he said. He touched the brim of his hat, a small, awkward courtesy. "That is my brother Silas at the fire, and the big one is Caleb. He is the eldest." "How many of you are there?" She did not know why she asked. She knew. She had to hear it. Jonah's young face went still. He glanced at his brothers. Caleb had his back to them, working the fire. Silas was looking at his hands. "Miss Linwood," Jonah began. "Not yet, Jonah," Caleb's voice from across the fire. He had not turned around. Adelaide closed her eyes. She felt very tired suddenly. She felt the weight of every mile she had traveled. She felt the cameo at her throat as if it weighed 10 pounds. She felt the absence of a man she had never met and the presence of a man she had somehow already known. "Tell me," she said, "please, tell me now. I am too tired to wait for it." Caleb set down the iron pot. He turned. He came across the cave and crouched in front of her where the firelight caught the planes of his face and made the whiskey of his eyes look almost gold. He rested his forearms on his knees. He clasped his hands, big hands, calloused hands, the hands she now knew that had written her into a life. "Miss Linwood," he said, "my brother Owen is dead." The words went through her without making sense at first. She heard them as sound. She watched his mouth shape them. They did not connect to anything she understood. 3 months ago, he went on, his voice low and steady, the first week of August. We were felling timber up the North Ridge. A pine went the wrong way. He was not where he should have been. He was where I told him to stand, and the tree came down where I told him it would not. I could not get to him fast enough. The fire popped. Snow hissed against the wall of stones. Your passage was already paid. Your letters were already coming. I could not stop them in time, and when I read them after he was buried, I could not bring myself to write to you and tell you what had happened. I did not know what to say to a woman who had crossed a continent for my brother, so I wrote in his name. I wrote and told you the road was hard but to come. I wrote and told you we would meet you at Pine Hollow. I told myself I would explain it when you arrived. I told myself I would put you on the next eastbound coach with money for your trouble and let you go back to your life, and you would never have to know that the man you had been writing to was already in the ground. I am sorry. I am ashamed, and I am sorry. The cave was very quiet. Adelaide could not speak. She could not move. She stared at the fire. She watched a coal break and fall and send up a small fountain of sparks, and she thought with strange detachment that she had never seen anything so beautiful and terrible at once. Owen Holloway was dead. She tried to feel grief. She tried to feel the loss of the man she had pictured, the man she had been writing to, the man whose face she had built up in her mind through 4 months of careful reading between the lines. She found instead a different grief altogether, a confusing one, because the face she had built up in her mind did not match the practical first letter that Owen had actually written. The face she had built up matched the second letter and the third and the fifth. The letters about moonlight and pine trees and the loneliness of forgetting the sound of a woman's voice. She lifted her eyes to Caleb's face. His eyes were waiting for her. They were not asking for forgiveness. They were not asking for anything. They were simply meeting hers as a man meets the consequences of his own truth. "Mr. Holloway," she said, and her voice came out quieter than she expected. "How many of those letters did you write?" He did not look away. "Most of them," he said, "after the first. Owen was not easy with words. I helped him at the start. I read your letters to him by the fire, and I wrote back what I thought he might say. He signed his name to them. Then in August, after he was gone, I kept writing. I told myself it was kindness. I do not know if it was kindness. I do not know what it was." She nodded slowly. "Once, twice. Then I want you to understand something, Mr. Holloway. And Caleb. Mr. Holloway, she kept his name formal because she did not yet trust herself with it. I am not weeping for the man in those letters because the man in those letters is sitting across from me. I am trying to understand what it means that I crossed a continent for a marriage to a dead stranger, and instead I am sitting in a cave with 3 men I do not know, one of whom has been writing to me for half a year under another man's name. I am trying to understand what kind of fool I am, so I am asking you plainly, what happens to me now? What? Silas spoke for the first time. His voice was quiet and careful, the voice of a man who weighed each word before he spent it. Miss Linwood, he said, whatever happens, you are not alone. You are not stranded. You will have a roof at Holloway Ranch as long as you need one. If you wish to return east, we will pay your passage and a year's wages besides, and you will leave with what dignity my brother failed to leave you. That is the least we owe you. That is not the most we owe you. The most will be whatever you decide it should be. Jonah, still crouched beside her, nodded fiercely. That is right, Miss Linwood. That is right. Caleb said nothing. He watched her face. The fire burned low. Outside, the storm went on. Adelaide pulled the blanket tighter around her shoulders. Her shoulder ached. Her temple burned. Somewhere very far away in a city she might never see again, an old aunt was sitting by a cold parlor fire telling herself she had been right. Adelaide thought of Boston. She thought of Mr. Hadley. She thought of the $4 a week. She thought of a man she had never met who had put a tree in the wrong place and died for it. She thought of a man she had not yet truly looked at who had written her into being seen for the first time in her life. Tonight, she said at last, tonight I will not decide anything. Tonight I will sleep in this cave. Tomorrow I will see your ranch. Then I will tell you what I have decided. Is that fair? That is fair, Caleb said. One more question, Mr. Holloway. Yes. Why did you come for me yourself? You could have sent a hand. You could have sent your brothers. You could have sent a wire to Cold Springs and turned me back before I ever crossed the pass. Why did you come yourself? For the first time since she had met him, the steady whiskey eyes flickered. He looked at the fire. He looked back at her. Because I owed it to you to tell you in person. And because he stopped. He started again. Because I had read your letters too many times to send anyone else. The wind moaned across the mouth of the cave. The horses shifted. Silas very quietly got up and walked to the back of the cave to check on them, giving his brother a moment that was not a moment for him to share. Jonah beside her looked at Caleb with a kind of slow surprise, as if he had not quite known until that instant the shape of what was sitting at this fire. Adelaide Linwood, the Boston librarian who had crossed a continent to marry a dead man, sat with her injured shoulder and her bandaged temple and her wet hair drying in the firelight, and she did not say anything. She did not need to. The storm settled into its long howl. The fire burned down to red coals. Silas built it back up. The night closed in. And outside the cave on the far side of the storm, a town called Pine Hollow waited with its judgments and its debts and its dangers. In an oak-paneled office in that town, a man named Cornelius Vance was already drafting the papers that would, in 6 weeks' time, attempt to take the Holloway homestead from the brothers who had built it. In a sitting room in a fine house on the same street, his daughter Beatrice Vance was already imagining the wedding she had been promised and was not yet aware that a stagecoach had gone over the edge at Widow's Ledge and that everything she planned for had begun to slip out of her hands. But all of that would come, for tonight there was only the fire and the storm and 4 people in a cave in the High Sierra and a question that none of them had answered yet. Adelaide Linwood lay down at last on a bed of folded blankets near the fire. Caleb Holloway sat with his back against the stone wall of the cave, his rifle across his knees, his eyes on the flames. He did not sleep. He watched her breathing slow and even out. He watched the firelight move across her face. He watched the cameo at her throat rise and fall. A good man keeps his word, he heard his father saying from a long way off and a long time ago. I have not been a good man, he thought. He set his jaw. He put another piece of wood on the fire. He kept his watch. Outside, the wind kept screaming. Inside, 4 lives that had nothing to do with each other before this night had been welded together by the storm. And somewhere in the dark on the back of the cliff above Widow's Ledge, the iron stake the Holloway brothers had driven into the rock to save a Boston girl they had never met still held against the wind like a promise made and not yet broken. Tomorrow she would see the ranch. Tomorrow she would meet a town that would judge her for sleeping in a cave with 3 men. Tomorrow the dead man in the letters would have a name on a wooden cross in a small clearing behind the Holloway barn, and she would have to stand at it and try to grieve a stranger she had loved by another man's hand. Tomorrow the truths would keep coming, and not all of them would be kind. But that was tomorrow. Tonight the storm raged and the fire burned, and Adelaide Linwood slept in a cave in the Sierra Nevada beside three men who had pulled her off the side of a mountain for no other reason than that she was a stranger in trouble. Tonight, against all reasons, she was warm. Tonight, against all expectation, she was not afraid. And the man with the whiskey-colored eyes kept his watch until morning. Morning came gray and slow. The storm had spent itself in the dark hours, and when Adelaide opened her eyes, a thin band of pale light was reaching into the mouth of the cave from a sky that had finally stopped throwing snow. The fire was banked but still warm. The horses had eaten down a measure of oats. From a feed bag, Caleb was no longer at his post against the cave wall, but the way the blanket near her was folded told her he had not used it. His eyes, when she found them across the fire, were red-rimmed and clear. He had not slept. Silas was already outside somewhere beyond the screen of pine boughs, his low whistle to the horses carrying back through the still air. Jonah was crouched at the fire, prodding it back to life with a piece of kindling, and when he saw Adelaide stir, he gave her a careful smile. "Coffee," he said. "Hot in a minute. How is the shoulder?" She tried it. Stiff, painful, but the joint moved, and that was something. "Bruised, I think. Not broken." Silas thought as much. He has set worse. She sat up slowly and pushed her hair back from her face. She caught Caleb watching her from across the cave. He looked away as soon as her eyes met his, the way a man does when he has been caught at something he has no right to. He stood joint stiff from a night on stone and went out without a word to help his brother with the horses. Jonah brought her the coffee. He squatted beside her and said nothing for a long moment, the way a young man does when he does not know how to be useful in the presence of a woman's quiet thinking. "He sat there all night," Jonah said at last. He did not move, not for nothing. Adelaide held the cup in both hands and watched the steam curl up into the cold air. "He does not talk much, does he?" "No, ma'am. Not since we lost Owen. Not much before that either, to tell the truth. Silas is the one who watches. Caleb is the one who carries." She nodded once. She drank her coffee. They left the cave at mid-morning. The world outside had been remade in white. The road buried the canyon below, filled with light fog that hid the wreckage of the stagecoach. Adelaide did not look down when they passed the bend. She kept her eyes on the back of Jonah's coat, where she rode behind him with her good arm around his waist. Caleb rode point. Silas rode drag. They moved at the slow, careful pace of men who knew better than to hurry on fresh snow, and they did not speak. The Holloway place came into view at mid-afternoon, in a fold of country that opened suddenly out of the timber. Adelaide had been told 200 acres, but she had not understood what 200 acres meant in that country until she saw it. A long, sloping meadow, a creek running fast through a stand of cottonwoods turning gold, a two-story log house set back against the lee of a rise with a stone chimney pumping pale smoke, a long barn, a smaller cabin behind, pole corrals, a smokehouse, a few dozen Hereford cattle scattered across the snow with their heads down, a pair of dogs that came bounding out at the sound of horses and were called off with a single low word from Silas. It was a working place, built by hands, maintained by sweat, not pretty in the way Boston used the word, but solid in a way Boston did not understand at all. Caleb helped her down at the front step of the main house. He kept his hand under her good elbow until he was certain her legs would hold. "Mrs. Pemberton came up yesterday and aired the rooms when she heard you were coming," he said. "There is a fire in the bedroom. There is hot water. There are clothes that should fit you. She left bread and a pot of stew on the stove. She is a good woman. She will be by tomorrow." Adelaide stood a moment in the cold yard and looked at the house. "Mr. Holloway." "Caleb. Caleb." She let the name out at last. "Careful with it. I would like to see his grave before I go inside. I would like to do that first." He looked at her for a long second, then he nodded. The grave was in a small clearing behind the barn on a rise that caught the southern light. There was a single wooden cross. The lettering had been burned in carefully with a heated iron. "Owen Eli Holloway, 1849 to 1875, beloved brother." The dirt on the mound was settled but still raw at the edges. Only 3 months in, Adelaide stood at the foot of the grave with her good hand wrapped around her bad elbow, and she tried to grieve. She could not exactly. She did not know him. The man in the ground had never seen her face. She had never heard his voice. She tried to picture him from the photograph she would later find on the bedroom dresser, but she had not yet seen the photograph, and her mind would not give her a face. So she stood there in the snow, and she did the thing she could do. She apologized. "I am sorry," she said inside herself. "I am sorry I never knew you. I am sorry your brother could not save you. I am sorry I came so far for a man I will never meet. I am sorry that of the two of us, I am the one still standing in the sun." After a while, when her face was wet and the cold was beginning to hurt, she felt Caleb step up beside her. He did not touch her. He simply stood, hat in his hands, his head bowed. "He was a good man, Miss Linwood. I believe you." He liked your letters. He used to read them out loud to us at the supper table. He laughed at things you wrote. He had not laughed in a long while before that. She closed her eyes and let the tears come for that because that was the thing she could grieve. Not the man, but the laugh. Not the stranger, but the brief warmth he had taken from a stranger's pen and carried with him into the last weeks of his life. Thank you, she said, for telling me that. He nodded once. He put his hat back on. He let her stand there until she was ready to go inside. That was how it began. The arrangement they made on the third day was a practical one. Adelaide insisted on practicality. She would not be a charity case. She would not be a guest. She had crossed a continent, and she would not creep through the rest of her life apologizing for being on it. She would take Owen's room at the head of the stairs in the main house. Caleb would take their father's old room on the ground floor. Silas and Jonah would continue to share the smaller cabin behind as they had since they were boys. Meals would be shared at the long table in the main room. Adelaide would do the cooking and the keeping of the house. She would be paid $2 a week against her board, and she would keep careful account of it, and at any time she chose to leave, she could do so with her wages owing and her passage east. That was the contract. They sat at the long table while Caleb wrote it out in his careful hand and signed it, and one by one his brothers signed it, and then she signed it last in a hand that was firmer than she felt. When the pen was set down, Jonah grinned. "Welcome to the Holloway place, Miss Linwood. Adelaide," she said, "if we are to share a roof, you may use my given name." Adelaide, he tried. He liked the sound of it. Adelaide. Silas beside him said nothing at all, but the corner of his mouth moved, and for Silas Holloway that was the equivalent of any other man laughing out loud. The first week she learned the house, the kitchen with its big iron stove and its hanging copper pots blackened by years of use, the pantry with its sacks of flour and beans and dried apples and the strings of jerky hanging from the rafters, the root cellar dug into the side of the rise behind the kitchen door, the long table in the main room hewn from a single slab of pine scarred by years of plates and elbows, and one place at the head where a knife had once gouged a deep mark when a younger Jonah had thrown it in temper. She learned the house had been built in 1867. Caleb told her this without looking at her while he was mending a length of harness in the barn, and she had come out to ask him a question about the larder. He told her the date almost in passing, the way a man mentions a thing he does not wish to be asked about. But she asked, "You were how old?" 22. Silas was 20. Owen was 18. Jonah was 17. "And before that you were where?" "Ohio. We came west the year our father died." She waited. He did not go on. "Caleb," she said, "I am going to be living under this roof. I would like to know whose roof it is. Who built it? What stones lie under the foundation? Will you tell me?" He set down the harness. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he nodded slowly, as if to himself, and said, "Walk with me." He took her along the line of the south meadow where the ground rose to a stand of aspens. The leaves were nearly gone, but a few still hung gold against the sky. He walked with his hands in his coat pockets and his eyes mostly on the horizon, and he told her. His father, Eli Holloway, had been a farmer in eastern Ohio, a hard man, a fair man, volunteered with the Ohio Infantry in the second year of the war, came home in 65 with a piece of iron in his hip he could not have removed and a cough he could not shake. Their mother had died before the war when Jonah was born. A second mother had come in 58, a widow named Ruth Caldwell, kind to the boys, gentle with their father. She had died of typhoid the autumn Eli came home, and Eli had never quite come back from that. In 66, Caleb at 21 had quarreled with his father over the selling of the home place. The old man wanted to sell and move west. Caleb wanted to stay and rebuild. They said things to each other no son and no father should say. Caleb had ridden out the next morning with $20 and a saddle horse, swearing he would not come back until he had made himself a man worth the name. A year later, in the autumn of 67, a neighbor of theirs had found him in a railroad camp in Kansas. The old man was dying, typhoid again, calling for him. Caleb stopped walking. They were standing under one of the aspens. He looked up into the thinning gold of the leaves. "I rode 3 days, Adelaide. I did not stop. I killed a horse. I bought another. I rode into my father's gate on a Monday morning, and there was black crepe on the door. I had missed him by less than a day." She did not say anything. She let the silence hold him. I went into the house. He was laid out in the front room. Silas was sitting beside him. Owen was in the kitchen with Jonah on his lap. Jonah was 7. He did not know what was happening exactly. He only knew his father had stopped speaking the day before. He took a slow breath. I knelt by the bed. I told my father I was there. I told him I was sorry. He could not hear me. He had been gone for hours. The neighbor woman who had laid him out told me kindly that he had been calling my name into Sunday night, that he had told Silas to keep the boys together, that he had said one last thing about a man keeping his word. That was what he left me, Adelaide. That was what I came home to. He turned his head and looked at her at last. I took my brothers west. That next spring, I swore I would not bury another member of this family alone. I built this house with their hands and mine. I have kept that promise for 8 years. And then this August, I lost Owen on a bright afternoon under a tree I had cut wrong, and I learned I was a liar to my father, to myself, to Owen, and in my own way to you. The wind moved in the aspens. A few of the last gold leaves came down. Adelaide stood with her good hand pressed to her mouth and tried to keep her face still. She did not entirely succeed. "Caleb," she said, "do not say it is not my fault, Miss Linwood. I will not believe it. So please, do not say it." "I was not going to," she said, "say that." He looked at her. He waited. "I was going to say that the man who told me what you just told me is not the man who killed his brother. The man who told me what you just told me is the man who has been keeping the others alive, and I think your father, wherever he is, knows the difference, even if you do not." Caleb Holloway did not answer her. He turned his face away. After a moment, he started back toward the house, and she followed. They did not speak of it again that day. But that evening, when the four of them sat down to supper at the long table, Caleb passed her the bread first, and he met her eyes when he did it, and Adelaide understood that some quiet line had been crossed between them and could not be uncrossed. The days settled into a rhythm. She was up before dawn. She lit the kitchen stove from the banked coals. She set the coffee on. She kneaded bread on the long table while the windows began to gray. By 6, the men were at the table. By 7, they were out. Caleb to the cattle, Silas to the timber line with rifle and traps, Jonah to wherever the heaviest work was, splitting wood, mending fence, hauling water from the creek when the well rope froze. Adelaide kept the house. She baked, she mended, she washed, she learned to render lard from the hogs Jonah had butchered before the snow. She learned which jars in the root cellar were apple and which were pear and which were the tomatoes Owen had put up his last summer, his name still inked on the lids in a hand she now recognized as Caleb's. She found to her surprise that she liked the work. There was nothing invisible about it. A loaf of bread either rose or it did not. A pot of stew either fed 4 men or it did not. A fire either kept the room warm or it did not. The library in Boston had asked her for nothing that she could measure. The Holloway house asked her for everything and gave her back in plain coin the proof that she had given it. In the evenings after the dishes, the 4 of them sat by the fire. Silas brought down a fiddle his father had made, a battered thing with one cracked string he had never been able to replace, and he played quiet airs that he had taught himself. Jonah carved. He was good with a knife. He had begun a small horse for a child he did not know yet, and he turned it slowly in his hands as he worked. Caleb read. He had a small shelf of books, and Adelaide was surprised to see her grandfather's name on 2 of them, an old volume of Emerson and a volume of Whittier. He read with his elbows on his knees and the firelight on his face, and sometimes he would look up at something Silas was playing, and his eyes would soften in a way that made Adelaide turn her own face to the fire so he would not catch her watching. She read aloud in the second week, Robert Burns from her own small book. She did not ask permission. She simply began. The men went very still. Silas stopped his fiddle. Jonah set down his carving. When she finished the poem, none of them spoke for a long moment, and then Jonah said very quietly, "Read another, please." She read another. She read every night after that. Mrs. Hester Pemberton came up the second Sunday as promised. She was a tall, thin woman of perhaps 60, the widow of the old reverend, with iron gray hair pinned tight and eyes that missed nothing. She had brought a basket of eggs and a fruit cake and a pointed willingness to look closely at the new woman in the Holloway house. She and Adelaide sat in the kitchen with cups of tea while the men were out at chores. "You are not what I expected," Hester said. "What did you expect?" "Some flighty thing with a parasol, the sort of girl who advertises in a paper because she cannot keep her place at home. You are not that." "How can you tell?" Hester looked at her over the rim of the cup. "Because you have flour on your wrist and you have not noticed and you do not care. Now listen to me, child. You are sitting in a house that has been a house of grief for 3 months. You are sitting at the table of the best man in this valley, and the best man in this valley is wound tight as a wagon spring. You are also, whether you know it or not, the talk of Pine Hollow. Do you understand? I am beginning to..." Beatrice Vance, that is the name you will hear, daughter of the banker. She has had her cap set at Caleb Holloway for 5 years. He has never given her the time of day. She does not take refusal kindly, and her father does not take inconvenience kindly, and the Holloway place owes that bank money it cannot pay until next summer's calves come to market. Do you understand what I am telling you? Adelaide set her cup down. How much? That is for Caleb to tell you, not me, but I will tell you this. If you stay, you will be a complication for that family in ways that have nothing to do with grief or letters or whether you can roll a pie crust. And if you leave, you will be the third good thing those boys have lost in 2 years, and Caleb may not survive a third. So make your decision with both eyes open. That is all an old woman has to say. She stayed for another half hour. She made Adelaide promise to come down to her cottage at the edge of the village some Sunday when the roads cleared. She squeezed her hand at the door hard and said, "I think I'm going to like you, child. Do not prove me wrong." When Adelaide closed the door behind her, she stood with her forehead against the wood for a long minute. Then she went and found the bread that needed punching down, and she punched it down with more force than was strictly necessary. She did not speak of Beatrice Vance to Caleb that evening or the next or the next. She watched. She listened. And on the 8th day after Hester's visit, she found in herself the courage for a different conversation entirely. She was dusting the bedroom that had been Owen's. She had been putting it off. She had told herself she was settled in well enough not to need to disturb his things, but the truth was simpler. She had been afraid of what she might find. She found a small wooden box under the bed. She knelt with it in her lap for a long time before she opened it. When she did, she found her own letters, all 22 of them tied with a length of brown twine. She found a small sketchbook full of careful pencil drawings of birds and creek bends and a young woman's profile that was not hers, that was someone else's, drawn over and over. Lillian. She found a single lock of pale gold hair tied with a ribbon and labeled in a careful hand, Lillian, June 1872. She found a small leather diary. She did not want to read it. She read it. The relevant entry was dated the 14th of July, 1875. She had been writing him by then for 2 months. Today, another letter from the Boston girl. Caleb read it to me at the supper table. She has a way with words. She put down a thing about feeling like a ghost in her own city that I have been feeling in my own woods for 3 years and could never have said. Caleb sat there at the supper after the reading, and he did not eat his stew. I have not seen him not eat his stew in 5 years. I think my brother is in trouble. I think he is falling for a woman he has never met, and he cannot see it because he is looking out for me. I am going to let it run a while. I want to see what it does to him. I owe him that much. I have not seen him want anything since father died. The next entry, dated the 28th of August, was the last. I have decided to tell Caleb tonight that he should write the next letter alone. Not for me, for himself, to her. I think it is time, if she is to come west, I want her to come for the man she has been writing to, and that man is not me. I am going to tell him at supper. I'm going to make him say it out loud. The entry ended there. Adelaide closed the diary very carefully. She put it back in the box. But before she replaced the box under the bed, she lifted out one more thing she had not noticed at first, folded into the lining of the lid. It was a single sheet of paper sealed with a smear of red wax, addressed in Owen's careful hand to one word: Caleb. She turned it over twice. She did not break the seal. She held it for a long moment, weighing it. Then very carefully she slid it inside the front cover of her own Bible on the small table by the bed where she would know to find it again, and only she would. She put the box back where it had been. She sat on the edge of Owen Holloway's bed in the room she now slept in, with her hands folded in her lap, and she did not cry. She had passed crying. She felt only a quiet, large astonishment. Owen had known. Owen had been about to tell him. Owen had died the next week with that conversation still on his tongue. And Owen had written something down before he died to the brother he meant to confront. Whatever it said, it was not hers to read, not yet. There would come a moment for that letter. She could feel it the way one feels the weight of a coming storm. She would know when. That night at the supper table, Adelaide did not look at Caleb. She served the stew. She passed the bread. She listened to Jonah tell a story about a fox he had seen in the upper meadow. She nodded in the right places. When supper was finished and Silas had gone out to check the horses and Jonah had gone out to bring in the next day's wood, she stood at the sink with her hands in the dishwater, and she said without turning, "Caleb, I read his diary today. I was not snooping. I was dusting, and I found it. I read the last 2 entries. I think you should know I read them." He had been at the table behind her. She heard him go very still. All right. He knew about the letters, about you. He was going to tell you that last week. The silence behind her stretched. Then she heard the slow scrape of his chair as he stood up. "Adelaide, look at me, please." She turned. Her hands were red from the hot water. Her hair was coming loose from its pins. She wiped her hands slowly on her apron and lifted her face. He was standing on the other side of the table with both hands flat on the boards. His head was down. The whiskey eyes came up and met hers, and she saw in them the things she had been pretending not to see for 2 weeks now. I was going to tell you, he said. I was working up to it. I wanted you to be settled first. I know. I have not said any of it to anyone, not to my brothers, not to him before he died. I did not even let myself say it to myself until tonight. I know, Adelaide, I have no right. I am the man who put the tree where it should not have been. I am the man who lied to you for 3 months in a dead man's name. I have a debt at the bank I cannot pay and a town that is going to talk about you because of me, and I have nothing in this world to offer a woman that I have not already failed to keep safe at least once. I have no right. Do you understand me? She did not answer at once. She walked around the end of the table. She stopped a foot away from him. She had to lift her chin to look him in the face. Caleb Holloway, I am going to tell you what I understand. I understand that I came west to marry a man, and that man is dead, and I am sorry for him with all my heart. I understand that the words on the page that made me get on a train and cross the continent were yours. I understand that those words saw me when no one in Boston had seen me in my whole life. I understand that I have been in this house 2 weeks, and I have already worked harder and laughed more and slept better than in any season I can remember. I understand that I am angry with you for the lie and not angry with you for the love, and I understand that I do not yet know what I am going to do about any of it. I understand all of that, do you? I understand. Then we are going to leave it where it stands tonight. We are going to wash the dishes. We are going to read by the fire. We are going to sleep under separate roofs as we have been. And tomorrow we are going to get up and do the work, and we are going to keep doing it. And somewhere in the doing of it, both of us are going to find out what comes next. Is that fair? His jaw moved. He nodded once. That is fair. They washed the dishes side by side without speaking. He dried what she handed him. Their hands brushed once when she passed him a wet plate, and neither of them looked at the other. The fire cracked in the next room. Silas was tuning his fiddle. Jonah was singing under his breath off key. Adelaide had been in California for 14 days. She had not yet decided to stay. She had not yet decided to go. But that night, lying in Owen's bed in the room above the kitchen, listening to the soft sound of Silas's fiddle through the floor, she pressed her good hand to her chest and felt her own heart beating steady and slow and alive, and she thought for the first time since her mother had died that it might be possible to be happy in this world after all. 3 days later, on the 15th of December, the riders came. It was nearly full dark. Adelaide was setting the table. Caleb was at the hearth with a poker. Silas was upstairs. Jonah came in from the porch with his face suddenly closed. 4 horses, he said, coming up the lane, slow. Caleb set down the poker. He went to the window. He stood there for a long second. Then he went to the door and lifted the heavy bar that had not been set in nearly 3 months and dropped it into its iron brackets. Get the rifle, Jonah. Silas, he called up the stairs company. Adelaide came to the window. Through the wavy glass she could see them now, 4 shapes against the failing light moving up the long lane between the snow-banked fences. The lead rider rode straight-backed and easy. The second was smaller, slighter riding side saddle. The 2 behind rode hard-faced with rifles across their saddles. Caleb's voice was very level. Adelaide, that is Cornelius Vance, the banker. The woman behind him on the gray is his daughter Beatrice. The 2 with rifles are men he hires when he wants something. They have come earlier than I expected. Why are they here? He turned to face her. The whiskey eyes were not soft now. They were the eyes she had first seen above the cliff at Widow's Ledge, steady, hard, ready. Because they have heard about you, and because the note on this place is something Cornelius Vance has been waiting 6 years to call. He is going to use you to do it. I am sorry, Adelaide. I should have told you sooner. There has not been the right moment. The sound of hoofbeats reached the front yard. The horses were halted. Boots came down hard onto the porch boards. A sharp gloved knock struck the door 3 times. A man's voice, smooth and cold and used to being obeyed, came through the wood. Mr. Holloway, open the door. We have business to discuss. Pleasant business, I should think. Pleasant at any rate for someone in this house. Caleb looked once at Adelaide. Then he set his hand on the bar. Stand by the fire, he said. Whatever is said in this room in the next hour, do not speak. Let me handle it. Will you trust me? She thought of the man on the cliff climbing down to her in the storm. She thought of the diary under the bed. She thought of the gold leaves coming down in the aspens. I will trust you, she said. He lifted the bar. He opened the door. Cornelius Vance stepped into the warmth of the Holloway house with his daughter at his heels and his 2 armed men behind, and the wind from the open door blew across the long table and made the lamp gutter, and Adelaide Linwood understood with a strange, clear calm that the storm she had survived on the high pass was not the last storm she would have to weather under the Holloway roof. The worst was just walking through the door. Cornelius Vance was a man built of straight lines, tall, narrow gray, suited under a black wool overcoat with a clipped white beard and eyes the color of pond ice. He removed his hat with the slow ceremony of a man who knew exactly how long he meant to keep his audience waiting, and he handed it without looking to the older of his two armed men who took it without expression. Beatrice Vance came into the room behind her father in a fur-trimmed traveling cloak that had not been made within 500 miles of Pine Hollow. Her hair was the dark, glossy red of old mahogany pinned up under a small velvet hat, and her face was beautiful in the careful, arranged way that beautiful women in small frontier towns sometimes wear when they have decided to wage a quiet war. Her eyes went straight to Adelaide and stayed there for one long, unblinking measure before they slid away. The two riflemen took up positions by the door without being asked. They did not sit. They did not speak. They were furniture that breathed. "Mr. Holloway," Cornelius said, "forgive the hour. I would have come tomorrow, but the weather promises another storm by Tuesday, and I prefer to have my conversations indoors and warm. May we sit?" "Sit," Caleb said. "Adelaide, the kettle, if you would." She moved to the stove with her hands steadier than her heart. She set the kettle on. She heard chairs scraping behind her at the long table, and the soft rustle of Beatrice arranging her cloak, and her father's voice, which she had already begun to hate, opening the conversation as if he were opening a ledger. "This is the young woman, then, Miss Linwood, from Boston, I am told." "Yes," Caleb said. "How extraordinary to come so far. For my condolences on Owen's passing, I am sorry I did not extend them in person. We were grieving with you in our way." "Thank you. And how convenient in such grief to find yourself with a young woman of marriageable age already shipped and paid for. Convenient for you, I mean. Less so, perhaps, for the young woman." Adelaide turned at the stove. Her face was hot. She kept her voice level. "Mr. Vance, I came of my own accord. I am not a parcel." "My dear, I was not suggesting you were. I was suggesting that Mr. Holloway is in a difficult position, financially speaking, and that a circumstance which others might find awkward he may find a great convenience. I am sure he has explained to you the state of his accounts." Caleb said nothing. He sat at the head of the table with his hands flat on the wood. Silas had come down the stairs and was standing at the foot of the staircase, leaning against the post with his arms folded. Jonah was in the doorway to the back hall with a rifle held casually across his forearm, the muzzle pointed at the floor. "He has not had the chance," Adelaide said. "I have been here only 2 weeks." "Then permit me to assist him." Cornelius drew from his inside coat pocket a folded sheaf of papers and laid it carefully on the table. $5,000, Mr. Holloway. The note your brother signed in August on this property against funeral costs, taxes, repairs to the south fence, and a small advance against fall sales. I extended every courtesy. I attended Owen's burial. I waited 3 months before I came up that lane. I have not waited because I forgot. I have waited because I am in my own quiet way a kind man. The note matures on the 1st of February, 6 weeks. After that, by the terms your brother signed, this house and these 200 acres become the property of the Pine Hollow Bank and Trust. Adelaide felt the room tilt. She put her hand flat on the iron of the stove without feeling it. Cornelius folded his hands on the table. "Now, Mr. Holloway, I am not a cruel man. I have a solution to put before you. My daughter, as you well know, has been patient with you for some years." Beatrice did not look at Caleb. She looked at the lamp. "If you and Beatrice were to be wed by the end of January, I would tear that note in half at the wedding supper. The marriage would be the consideration. The debt would be considered paid in full. You would keep your land. Your brothers would keep theirs. The town would speak well of you. Beatrice would be mistress of this house. And Miss Linwood," his ice eyes turned, "Miss Linwood would, of course, be returned to Boston in comfort with her wages and a small additional sum to compensate for her trouble. I would see to it personally." The kettle began to whistle. Adelaide moved it off without thinking. Caleb still had not spoken. He sat with his hands flat on the boards and looked at the folded papers. "And if I refuse," he said, "then the note matures, then I foreclose, then I become the proprietor of this homestead, and you and your brothers become tenants of the bank, or more likely become nothing at all. And there is one further matter you may wish to consider, since we are speaking plainly." He drew out a second envelope. This one was thicker. "I have by certain professional courtesies obtained a copy of the coroner's full report on your brother's death. The official finding, as you know, is accidental. The full transcript, however, contains the testimony of 2 of the men who were on that ridge with you. I will not read it aloud at your supper table in front of a young lady. I will say only that there is a version of those events in which you do not appear in a kindly light. There is a version in which the question is not whether the tree fell wrong, but whether the cut was wrong. There is a version in which a man might face a charge of negligent homicide aside, were the matter to be raised again with the new circuit judge, I have no interest in raising it, but papers have a way of being lost or kept depending on the disposition of the man who holds them. He set the envelope beside the note. He set his palm on it. 6 weeks, Mr. Holloway. Marry my daughter, and the note vanishes, and so does this. Refuse, and we shall see what the spring brings. The fire popped. No one moved. Then Silas, against the staircase post, said quietly, Caleb. Caleb did not turn his head. He was looking at the envelope. He was looking through it into something only he could see. What is in that report, Cornelius? I think you know Mr. Holloway. Read it aloud. Beatrice spoke for the first time. Her voice was lower than Adelaide had expected and steadier. Caleb, father, please, not in front of. She did not finish the sentence. She did not look at Adelaide either. Read it aloud, Caleb said again. Cornelius opened the envelope. He drew out a single-page top sheet of several, and he read in the dry voice of a man at a podium. Witness statement of Tobias Carter Sawyer, taken the 8th of August, 1875, question. Mr. Carter, in your judgment, was the cut on the south side of the trunk a proper undercut? Answer, no, sir, it was not. The undercut was set too high and too shallow on the south face. A tree cut so will not fall in the direction of the felling notch. It will twist on the hinge. Question. And in your judgment, who set that undercut? Answer, the eldest Mr. Holloway, sir, Caleb Holloway. He was on the saw. Cornelius lowered the paper. There is more, Mr. Holloway. 3 pages more. I will not trouble the company further. The long table was very quiet. Adelaide felt, rather than saw, Jonah move. The young man had taken 1 step forward away from the doorway. His face had gone white and then red, and his green eyes were fixed on his eldest brother. Caleb, Jonah's voice was rough. What is he saying? What is he saying about you and Owen? Silas put a hand on Jonah's shoulder, held him. Caleb Holloway lifted his face at last and looked at Cornelius Vance. You have a copy of that statement. I have the only copy. Outside of an envelope in the courthouse safe to which I, by certain courtesies, have access. Then keep it, Cornelius, and keep your daughter. I will not buy your silence with my life. I will not buy it with hers, either. His eyes moved once to Beatrice. I am sorry, Miss Vance. I have been sorry for some years now. You have been waiting for a man who has never been at home and who never will be. That is no slight on you. It is the truth. Beatrice sat very still. 2 spots of color had come into her cheeks. She did not answer him. Cornelius gathered up the papers slowly. He put them back inside his coat. He stood. You have 6 weeks, Mr. Holloway. I will not ask again. On the 1st of February, I will be at this door with the sheriff. After that, on the 2nd of February, I will be at the courthouse with a different sort of paper. He turned his face to Adelaide. Miss Linwood, you strike me as an intelligent young woman. I would advise you to think carefully in the next 6 weeks about whose ship you wish to be on when it goes down. You can be in Sacramento on a paid coach by the end of the month and in Boston by the end of January. If you ask, and only if you ask, I will arrange it. Adelaide met his eyes. Mr. Vance, get out of this house. He inclined his head. Good evening, Miss Linwood. He turned and walked out. Beatrice rose without looking at anyone and walked out behind him, the hem of her cloak whispering on the floor. The 2 riflemen followed last, and the older one took up Cornelius's hat from where it had sat all evening and pulled the door shut behind him with a soft, polite click. The hoofbeats moved down the lane and away. For a long second, nothing happened in the room. Then Jonah came across the floor in 2 strides and stood over his brother at the table. Caleb, look at me. Caleb did not. Look at me, Caleb. Slowly, the eldest Holloway raised his head. What did he just read out of that envelope? About the cut, about Owen. Tell me he was lying. Tell me, Caleb. Silence. Jonah's voice went up a notch. Tell me he was lying. He was not lying, Caleb said. Jonah took a step back as if something invisible had pushed him. You set the cut wrong. Yes, you set the cut wrong on the tree that killed Owen, and you knew, and you let the inquest say accident, and you let Silas and me bury him thinking there was nothing more to it. And you have been carrying this for 3 months without one word. To me. To him, to anyone. Silas behind said quietly, Jonah, sit down. Don't sit me down, Jonah said. He was crying suddenly and without warning, the way a young man cries when he has been holding something he did not know he was holding. Don't you sit me down, Silas. 3 months we have been eating supper at this table with him and looking him in the face. 3 months. Caleb, look me in the eye and tell me why. Because Caleb stopped. He cleared his throat. He started again. Because if I had told you that the cut was mine and the tree was mine and his death was mine, I did not think you would forgive me. I did not think Silas would forgive me. I did not think I could lose the both of you in the same year. So I let the report stand. I paid the sheriff to keep the second testimony quiet. I told myself it was for you. I see now it was for me. I see now it was the worst thing I have done in my life. I am sorry, Jonah. I am sorry. I am sorry. He put his face in his hands. The eldest Holloway brother, the man who had climbed down a cliff in a storm, the man who had kept his watch all night in a cave in the Sierra, sat at his own table with his face in his hands and his shoulders shaking once, twice, and went still. Jonah stood for one long second. Then he turned and walked out the front door and pulled it closed behind him, and they heard him saddling a horse in the dark. Silas crossed the room. He went out after Jonah without a word. Adelaide could hear their voices through the wall, low and strained Silas's, the steadier one. She did not hear what was said. After a few minutes, a single horse went down the lane at a hard pace, and another did not. The door opened. Silas came back in alone. He shut it carefully. He needs a night, Silas said. He will go to the McKenna place. Old Angus will give him a bed and not ask. I told him to come back in the morning. He may not. He came to the table. He pulled out the chair at his brother's right hand. He sat. He laid his hand on the boards beside Caleb's. Brother, he said, look at me. Caleb, after a moment, did. Silas, who almost never spoke unless he had measured every word, took a long breath like a man preparing to lift something heavy. I am going to tell you something I have not told a living soul. Not Owen, not you, not even Lillian before she died. I am going to tell you tonight because I do not want either of us to walk out of this room until we have stopped lying to each other. Do you hear me? Caleb nodded once. Silas took a slow breath. I loved her before he did. Lillian, the summer of '72. I rode down to her grandmother's place every Sunday for 3 months. I was going to ask the old woman's permission to come courting properly that August. The week before, I meant to ask. Owen came home from Sacramento, and he met her at the church social, and inside of an hour I knew. I stood there at the punch bowl and watched my younger brother fall in love with the girl I had been working up to for half a year, and I knew that if I said one word, it would be a word that broke him. So I did not say the word. I rode home. I never went back to that porch on a Sunday again. I told myself I was being a man. I let him have her. 3 months later, she was in the ground with the fever, and I had not even said goodbye to her properly because I had given up the right to... He paused. He looked at his hands. I have been carrying that for 3 years, Caleb. I have not told you. I have not told Jonah. I told myself it was nothing because nothing came of it, but it was not nothing. And the truth, the real truth is that I have understood every wrong thing you have ever done, brother, because I have done my own. The difference is only that you got caught and I did not. You are not a worse man than me, Caleb. You have only been tested harder. Caleb stared at him. Silas. I am not finished. The other thing I'm going to say is this. You set a cut wrong. You will carry that until you die. Owen would not have wanted it for you, but you will carry it, and there is nothing I can say tonight that will lift it. But you did not murder him. You loved him. You worked beside him for 8 years. You taught him to fell a tree in the first place. The tree that killed him was a tree you would have bet your life he would walk away from. You were wrong by an inch. Men have died for less, and good men have lived who set worse cuts than that one and got lucky. Do not let Cornelius Vance turn an inch into a hanging. Do not let yourself either. We need you, brother. Jonah needs you. I need you. And his eyes flickered toward Adelaide, who had not moved from the stove. And there is a woman in this room who needs you too, even if she has not said so. So you will get up, you will eat your supper, you will sleep tonight, and tomorrow we will figure out how to keep this house together. Are you hearing me? Caleb's throat moved. He could not speak for a long moment. Then he said very low, I am hearing you. Good, Silas said. Now eat your supper before it goes cold. Adelaide has been holding it on the stove for an hour. She had not realized she was crying until she felt the tears on her chin. She brought the plates to the table. She set one before Caleb. She set one before Silas. She sat down at her own place. None of them spoke for a long time. Caleb ate slowly like a man relearning the act. Silas ate steadily. Adelaide could not eat at all. She watched her bread go untouched, and she thought with a dull, clear feeling that her life had fallen into a different shape in the course of 1 hour, and she did not yet know what shape. Jonah came back at dawn. He came in cold and red-eyed, smelling of horse and wood smoke and the McKenna pipe tobacco. He stood inside the door. He did not look at his eldest brother for a long second. Then he did. I rode all night, Jonah said. Old Angus made me sit by his fire, and he told me about the time our father was a young man and got a friend killed in the woods near Marietta. He said our father carried that to his grave. He said our father was the best man Old Angus ever knew. He said the difference between a man and a coward is whether he can keep walking with the weight on his back. He said it twice. Jonah paused. I am not going to forgive you tonight, Caleb, but I am not going anywhere either. You have me. We will figure the rest out by daylight. Caleb stood up at the table. He crossed to his brother. They did not embrace. Caleb put his hand on the back of Jonah's neck the way a father will with a young son, and rested his forehead briefly against his brother's shoulder and stepped back. Jonah's mouth shook once and then steadied. I am hungry, Jonah said. Adelaide, tell me there is breakfast. There is breakfast. That was the morning the brothers came back together, not whole, not the way they had been before August, but standing. The next 4 weeks were the hardest weeks of Adelaide Linwood's young life and the most determined. She did not panic. She would think about that later with some surprise. She did not weep at her bed at night. She did not write to Boston. She walked into the village 3 days after Cornelius's visit, and she walked into the dry goods store, and Mrs. Wallace at the counter looked up and looked away and said quietly that she did not believe she could serve Miss Linwood today. Adelaide stood in the middle of the store. She was conscious of 3 other women standing very still by the bolts of calico. She was conscious of Beatrice Vance, who happened to be near the front window with 2 friends and who did not turn her head. Adelaide spoke clearly into the silence of the store. My name is Adelaide Margaret Linwood. My father was Henry Linwood of Boston, who died in a railway accident when I was 6. My mother was Margaret Linwood, who died this past May of consumption. I worked 4 years at the Boston Athenaeum at $4 a week. I came west to be married to Owen Holloway, of whose death I was unaware until my arrival. I have lived under the Holloway roof these 3 weeks because I had nowhere else to go, and because 3 brothers who lost their own brother have shown me a kindness I did not earn. I have not done a single thing to be ashamed of in this town, and I will not behave as if I have. I will purchase 10 pounds of flour, 2 pounds of coffee, a paper of needles, and 3 yards of muslin. I will pay in coin. If you will not sell to me, I will go to Reverend Pemberton's house, and I am told by his widow that he keeps a small store of staples for travelers, and I will purchase them there. The choice is yours, Mrs. Wallace. Mrs. Wallace's eyes flickered. A long moment passed. Behind Adelaide, very quietly, one of the women by the calico said, "Oh, for heaven's sake, Margaret, sell the girl her flour." It was Mrs. McKenna, a woman of about 50 with iron gray hair under a sensible bonnet. She came forward. "And while you are at it," she said, "put a paper of pins on her account and put it on mine. My husband Angus is the smith at the South End, and our boy Donal needs his shirts mended, and I am told this young woman has a fine hand." Adelaide turned to her. "Thank you, Mrs. McKenna." "Do not thank me, child. Thank my Angus. He came home from the Holloway place at 7 this morning, and he sat at my kitchen table, and he said something I have not heard him say about a young man in 20 years. He said, 'Caleb Holloway is going to need every friend he has got,' and so is the girl in his house. That was good enough for me. Mrs. Wallace, the flour, please." Mrs. Wallace, after a long pause, weighed out the flour. It was not a victory. It was the first crack in a wall. Adelaide walked out of the store with her packages on her arm and her chin level, and she did not see Beatrice Vance turn from the window with a face the color of old paper. In the days that followed, the small kindnesses began. A jar of preserves left on the porch by Mrs. McKenna, a side of bacon brought up by Reverend Pemberton's stable boy, an invitation to read at the schoolhouse Christmas program from the schoolmistress, which Adelaide accepted, and at which she read Burns to 14 children and 40 parents, and at which she stood at the door afterward and shook the hand of every man and woman who came through it, including 2 who would not meet her eyes in the morning and could not avoid them in the firelight. Hester Pemberton, walking her home that evening with a lantern, said only, "Well done, child, well done." Meanwhile, the 4 of them at the Holloway place worked. They worked the way people work when they are trying to outrun a date on a calendar. Jonah rode down to the McKenna place every other day to learn from old Angus the smith's trade of repairing tools, because every dollar saved on tools was a dollar that could go to Cornelius Vance. Silas trapped marten and fox in the high country by night and by day, and Adelaide stretched and cleaned the pelts in the back kitchen, her hands chapped raw, the smell of tallow and oil in everything she wore. Caleb cut firewood in quantities that would have killed a smaller man, splitting cord after cord by the back fence, selling what they did not need to 2 neighbors who paid in cash and did not ask how it was being spent. Adelaide sent a telegram to Boston on the 20th of December. It was short. It went to Mr. Bartholomew Pierce, the elderly attorney who had handled her mother's small estate. It read, "Mr. Pierce, stop urgent, stop, please review my mother's papers and effects for any holdings or trusts I do not know of. Stop, respond by wire to Pine Hollow, California, stop a Linwood." She did not tell Caleb she had sent it. She did not want to give him a hope she could not deliver. She kept the receipt folded in the lining of her sleeve. The first kiss was an accident. They told themselves so afterward. It was the second to last day of December, late in the evening, after a long day in which Caleb had ridden 10 miles to a neighbor's place to deliver a load of split wood and 10 miles back, and Adelaide had sat up 2 nights in a row finishing a quilt to sell at the New Year's market in town. He had come into the kitchen for a cup of water before bed. She had been at the back window looking at the snow falling silver under the moon. He had stopped behind her, not meaning to, because she had turned at the sound of his step, and they had been standing closer than either of them realized. He had said her name once, quietly. She had lifted her face. The moon was on the snow. The fire was low in the next room. Silas was asleep upstairs. Jonah was at the McKenna's. The kitchen smelled of coffee and beeswax and pine. He bent his head. She did not move away. His mouth touched hers briefly, a brush, hardly a kiss at all. He pulled back at once, half a step, his hand finding the edge of the table behind him, his eyes searching her face in a sudden alarm. "Adelaide, forgive me. I should not have." She did not answer for a heartbeat. Then she put her hand carefully against his cheek. She held it there a moment. She felt the rasp of his beard. She felt the warmth of him. "Good night, Caleb," she said. She stepped past him. She went up the stairs to her room. She closed the door. She stood with her back against it for a long time. Then she crossed to the bed and sat on its edge and pressed both hands to her mouth and laughed once quietly in something that was not quite happiness, but was the first thing that had felt like happiness since her mother died. 2 days later, on the 2nd of January, the second storm came. It came down out of the north on a wind that took the porch thermometer to 20 below by sundown. It snowed for 3 days without stopping. By the morning of the 5th, the drifts were against the second floor windows on the north side of the house, and the cattle had to be dug out of the lee of the south fence with shovels and led one by one to the barn. Silas and Jonah went out together at dawn to bring them in. They did not come back at noon. Caleb saddled his horse at 1 in the afternoon. He found them at 2 on the High Meadow Trail. Silas was conscious but slurring with a deep gash on his temple from a fall, his horse standing over him. Jonah had Silas wrapped in his own coat and was trying to walk him in. The wind was rising again. By the time Caleb got them home, Silas could not stand. He went into a fever by supper time. By midnight, it was 104. By dawn, he was raving, unintelligible eyes, rolling body burning to the touch. Adelaide pressed cold, wet cloths to his temples and his throat and his wrists and sang under her breath any song she could remember from her mother's parlor in Boston, and Jonah sat at the foot of the bed and held his brother's bare feet in his hands and would not let go. Caleb stood in the doorway with his coat already on. "The doctor in Pine Hollow is at the smallpox camp at Hangtown," he said. 40 miles, bad road in this weather. "Caleb," Adelaide had not turned from the bed, "you cannot go in this. You will die. Silas will die if I do not. Caleb." He came across the room. He put his gloved hand on the back of her neck briefly, the lightest touch, and he leaned down and kissed the crown of her head. Once. He did not say anything to her at all. Then he was at the door, and Jonah was helping him with the lashings on his saddlebags, and the front door opened and closed, and the sound of one horse went down the lane into the white. Adelaide stood at the bedside with her hand at the place on her head where he had kissed her, and the certainty came over her with a calmness that almost frightened her that he might not come back. For 2 days, the wind tore at the house and Silas Holloway burned. For 2 days, Adelaide and Jonah took shifts at his bed and at the windows and at the door where they kept a lamp burning all night long. On the third night, just before midnight, when the wind had died at last to a thin, steady moan, and Adelaide had nearly given up on hope, the front door scraped open. Caleb Holloway stood in the doorway in a coat solid with ice. His beard was white with rime. His lips were cracked and bleeding. The 2 fingers of his right hand were the color of slate, and he could not close them. He held in his good left hand a small brown paper packet wrapped in oilcloth. "For Silas," he said. His voice did not sound like his voice. Then his knees folded. Jonah caught him before he hit the floor. Adelaide took the packet. She mixed the powder with water as the doctor's note inside instructed. She lifted Silas's head and got it down him swallow by swallow. She wrapped Caleb in every blanket in the house and set him by the fire and made Jonah hold his ruined hand in a basin of cool water to bring the blood back slowly. She moved between the two beds all night. She did not weep. She did not stop. By dawn, Silas's fever had broken. By dawn, Caleb was sleeping a real sleep, the ragged kind a man sleeps after he has drawn too long on what he had. Adelaide sat down on the floor between the two of them with her back against the leg of the table, and she put her face in her hands at last. She heard footsteps. The door, a horse outside, voices in the yard, which were Hester Pemberton and old Angus McKenna, who had ridden up at first light when the wind dropped, fearing the worst. And behind them on a sleigh, a fourth figure, an older man in city clothes that had not been cut for snow, climbing carefully down with a leather case in his hand. Mr. Bartholomew Pierce of Boston, 8 days out of Sacramento. He came to the door. Hester let him in. He took off his hat and stood there blinking in the warmth of the kitchen, looking from the woman on the floor to the man asleep in the chair to the brother in the back room, and he cleared his throat. Miss Linwood, he said, forgive the hour. I have come a long way. I have news for you about your mother's estate that I did not feel could safely be sent by wire. May we speak? She put him in the parlor with a cup of coffee and a slice of the bread she had baked the morning before. She closed the door. She sat across from him in her grandmother's cameo and her hair coming down in pieces and her hands chapped to the bone, and she folded those hands in her lap and waited. Mr. Pierce was a small man, perhaps 70, with white side whiskers and a way of polishing his eyeglasses with a square of silk before he spoke that made him seem older than he was. Miss Linwood, he said, your mother trusted me with her papers when she could no longer rise from her bed. She made me promise to look after you. I did what I could in the weeks following her death. I did not at the time find what I have found this past month. I wish to apologize for the delay. Old men miss things. Mr. Pierce, please, tell me. He nodded. He opened the leather case. Your mother, as you know, was Margaret Linwood, born Margaret Whitcomb, of the Whitcomb family of Beacon Hill. Her father was Augustus Whitcomb, a partner in the Whitcomb and Adams banking house, a man of considerable means. When your mother married your father, who was, with respect, a draftsman of ordinary income, the Whitcomb family disowned her formally. She lived the rest of her life as if no inheritance had ever existed, and she raised you, as you know, in the careful poverty of a respectable widow. Adelaide nodded. She had heard it all before. What I learned in the past month, Mr. Pierce said, by going through certain ledgers belonging to your late grandmother on the Whitcomb side, Eleanor Whitcomb, who died last winter, is that your grandmother did not in fact abide by the family's edict. She set aside a small trust in your name on the day of your christening. 50 shares of the Boston and Maine Railroad, purchased at par at that time, held in trust against your majority or your marriage, whichever should come first. The trust was constructed in such a way that even your mother did not know of it. Your grandmother feared, I think, that your mother's pride might forbid her to draw upon it. He paused. He polished his glasses. Miss Linwood, I have inquired with the brokers. The 50 shares of Boston and Maine held since the year of your birth are now worth a little above $5,500 at current market. There is also accrued interest on the dividends, which were never drawn, of approximately $700. The trust has matured. The funds are yours. I have the documents here for your signature. Adelaide did not move for a long count. She had grown up cold. She had grown up in attics. She had grown up watching her mother count quarters at the kitchen table on Friday nights. Her mother had died believing she had nothing to leave her child but a cameo and a Bible and the memory of a careful, careful life. She put her face in her hands and wept once hard like a child, and then she lifted her head and dried her cheeks on her apron and said, Mr. Pierce, I have a question to ask you. Is there a Pine Hollow bank that would honor a draft drawn against this account? The Pine Hollow Bank and Trust holds correspondent relations with the Boston and Maine Clearinghouse. Yes, a draft drawn here would clear in the usual way. Then I would like to draw $5,000 as soon as that is possible to arrange. Mr. Pierce looked at her over his eyeglasses. Miss Linwood, may I ask the purpose? There is a debt against this house that comes due on the 1st of February, $5,000. I intend to pay it. The man who holds the note is the same banker who would clear the draft. There is a certain symmetry to it that I find satisfying. The old attorney looked at her for a long moment, then a small dry smile lifted the corner of his mouth. Miss Linwood, your mother would have liked to see you do this. I will draw up the documents this morning. I imagine you have a kitchen table I may use. 2 days later, on the morning of the 17th of January, the paperwork was complete. Mr. Pierce stayed at the Holloway house for the duration, sleeping in Adelaide's room while she made up a pallet by the fire. He took his meals at the long table with the brothers and Caleb, who was on his feet again. Though slow with the cold he had taken, watched in silence the careful way the old man buttered his bread, and the careful way the old man laughed at Jonah's jokes, and seemed to him for the first time in months that the world might still hold gentleness in unexpected places. Adelaide did not tell Caleb what was in the leather case until the last document was signed. She told him on the porch in the evening of the second day, with the smoke of the chimney rising straight up into a still, cold sky, and the dogs lying with their noses on her boots. She told him plainly, Caleb, Mr. Pierce did not come west to bring me bad news. He came to bring me the contents of a trust my grandmother set aside for me at my christening that no one in my family knew about. There is enough money in that trust to pay your debt to Cornelius Vance and have a little left over. I have already drawn a draft. We will go to the bank tomorrow morning. He did not say anything for a long moment. Adelaide, that is your money. It is our money if you will marry me, Caleb Holloway. I do not say that lightly. I do not say it because I have to. I say it because I want to. And before you tell me you are not worthy of a good woman, I will tell you that I know what you are. I know about the cut. I know about your father. I know about the letters. I know about the diary. I know about everything except the one thing I have not yet shown you, and I will show you that one tonight. Will you sit with me by the fire after supper? Just the two of us. There is a thing your brother left for you that he never had time to give you, and I have been keeping it safe. He looked at her in the dimming blue light of evening, and the whiskey eyes held a long question and then a quieter answer, and he nodded. I will sit with you, he said. After supper, Silas, who had begun to rise from his bed, though his head still pained him, took Jonah by the elbow and steered him out the door on some pretext of checking the mares, and the two of them did not come back for an hour. Adelaide knew her brother-in-laws were giving her a kitchen. She brought down her Bible from the bedroom. She drew out the folded paper that had been tucked behind the front board for a month. She set it on the table between them. This was in the box under your bed, she said. I found it the day I read his diary. I did not break the seal. I did not have the right. It is addressed to you. I think he wrote it the week he died. I think he had something he wanted to say to you that he never got the chance to say with his voice. Caleb looked at the folded paper for a long time. He did not pick it up at once. Adelaide, will you read it with me? It is for you. He wrote it to me, but it is for both of us now. Will you? She moved her chair around to his side of the table. He broke the seal carefully with his pocket knife, the way a man opens something that might be the last thing he ever opened. He unfolded the paper. They read it together in the lamplight with the fire ticking down in the next room. Brother. I do not know why I'm writing this. I have a feeling. I think I am going to say something at supper this week that you will not be ready for, and I want to put down on paper what I would like to say at the funeral if it goes the wrong way, and I am the one in the box. Funny, I am writing that out and laughing at it. The cottonwoods are gold this morning. I do not feel any closer to the next life than usual. Still. Caleb, I have read your letters to Adelaide over your shoulder for 4 months. I have watched you read hers a dozen times each by the fire. I have watched you not eat your stew. I have been a fool not to see it sooner. You are in love with her. You are in love with a woman you have never met, and you are writing your love in my name, and you are doing it because you think you owe me. You do not owe me anything. You took me out of Ohio when our father died. You taught me to fell a tree. You taught me to read a brand. You stood up for me at the Pemberton house when I asked for Lillian, and when she died, you sat with me in the loft for 2 nights without sleeping, and you did not say one word, and that was all I needed. Brothers do not owe each other. Brothers are. So I want to write down while I have the time and the paper and the morning what I want you to do if anything happens to either of us. If the woman comes and I am still here, I am going to tell her at the depot that the man who wrote those letters is the man standing next to me, and she is going to choose between us, and I am going to be all right with whatever she chooses, because I see now that she was never really writing to me. If anything happens to me before she gets here, I want you to tell her the truth at once. Do not protect her from it. Do not protect yourself with it. Tell her. And if she wishes to go back east, you put her on the coach with money and a kindness, and you let her go. And if she wishes to stay, brother, you marry her. You marry her without one more day of hesitation. You marry her with my blessing. You marry her with our Father's blessing too, because I know what he would say, and so do you. A good man keeps his word. I am giving you mine in this paper, in case I cannot give it to you in person. Be happy, Caleb. I have been carrying my Lillian for 3 years, and I would not wish that on you for one more day. I have seen something in your face this summer I have not seen since you were a boy. It is hers, brother. It came from her hand into yours. Do not bury it, too. I love you. I am going to go into supper now, and I'm going to laugh at one of Jonah's jokes because Jonah needs us to laugh at his jokes. If something happens, do not blame yourself. We work in the woods. The woods are the woods. I have always known that, and so have you. Your brother Owen. The letter ended. Caleb sat with the paper in both hands and his head bowed for a long while. Adelaide did not touch him. She let him have it. She watched the fire move on the back of his hand on the calluses that had mended her ledge wound and lifted her off a shelf of stone in a storm and had now at last been given permission by the man who had loved them best. When Caleb lifted his face, his eyes were full and unashamed. Adelaide, I do not know what to say. Then do not say anything yet. Go for a walk in the yard. Come back when you are ready. I will be here. He went out. He stood under the cottonwoods by the creek for nearly half an hour, his head tilted up to the cold sky, and he wept the way men weep when they have been given a thing they thought they had lost forever. The dog sat with him. Silas, who had come around the side of the barn, quietly unseen, did not approach. He turned and went back into his cabin and made Jonah a cup of coffee and said nothing. Caleb came back in at last. He did not sit at the table this time. He walked around to where Adelaide was sitting by the fire, and he knelt down on one knee in front of her chair, and his hands he laid on her knees, and the firelight moved on the side of his face. Adelaide Margaret Linwood, he said, I have been a man not worth your trouble these 3 months past. I have loved you for half a year through a brother's name. I have kept your safety against my chest as if I were owed it when I was not. I am going to spend whatever time I have left in this world trying to be a man your mother in heaven would have approved of. I am asking you to marry me. I am asking you to marry me without the money. I am asking you to marry me with the money. I am asking you to marry me with my brother's blessing in your hand, which is the only blessing in this house I know how to keep. Will you have me? She put her hands over his. I have already had you, Caleb Holloway. I have had you since the second letter. The rest is just paper. Is that a yes? That is a yes. He kissed her then. It was not the brush of an accident this time. It was a kiss given and a kiss received, and the fire ticked, and outside in the yard, one of the dogs barked once at a moving shadow that was probably nothing, and the kitchen smelled of bread and pine, and Adelaide thought for the second time since she had crossed the Mississippi that this was what it was to be seen. When Silas and Jonah came back in, they took one look at the two of them, and Jonah gave a whoop that startled the dogs, and Silas very quietly, very gravely walked across the room and put his hand on his brother's shoulder and said only, about time. The bank was a different sort of room the next morning. Cornelius Vance sat behind his oak desk in the front office of the Pine Hollow Bank and Trust with his clerk at a small table to his right and his daughter Beatrice standing pale and silent against the bookcase behind him. Caleb stood in the middle of the room with Adelaide on his good arm. Silas and Jonah had come along but had stayed in the lobby leaning against the wall in the way of men who are not threatening but are clearly there. Caleb laid the draft on the desk. $5,000, Cornelius, drawn against an account in Boston that has cleared the wire this morning as your own clerk has confirmed. Tear up the note. We are paid in full. Cornelius Vance did not move at first. He looked down at the draft. He looked up at Adelaide. The pond ice eyes for the first and last time flickered. Miss Linwood, he said. Mr. Vance, you are a more resourceful woman than I credited. I was a librarian, Mr. Vance. We are not all what we appear. He pulled the note from his desk drawer. He examined it with the slow ritual of a man who has lost and means to lose. With dignity, he took up his pen. He drew a single firm line through the face of the document and signed his name beneath and dated it and stamped it and turned it around for Caleb to read. Paid in full. Cornelius Vance, the 17th of January, 1876. He stood. He extended his hand across the desk. Caleb shook it once. And the other matter, Caleb said, the envelope. Cornelius held his eyes for a long moment. Then he reached into his coat. He drew out the thicker envelope from the December night. He laid it on the desk on top of the canceled note. It is yours, Mr. Holloway. I wish you a long life. Thank you. Caleb took up the envelope. He took up the canceled note. He took up Adelaide's hand. They walked out of the bank into the bright, cold January morning, and Beatrice Vance did not follow them with her eyes because she had fixed her eyes on a point on the floor and would not lift them again until the door had closed. That afternoon in the Holloway kitchen, Caleb opened the iron stove and laid the witness statements one by one onto the coals. He did not read them. He did not need to. He laid them in carefully, almost ceremoniously, and watched the paper curl and blacken and become smoke. Silas and Jonah and Adelaide stood behind him, and no one spoke. And when the last page had gone, Caleb closed the stove door and turned around, and his face was not the face of the man who had walked into the cave at Widow's Ledge 2 months before. It was the face of a man who had set down a stone he had been carrying for too long. They were married at the Pine Hollow Methodist Church on the 17th of April, 1876, on a soft Saturday afternoon when the cottonwoods along the creek had broken into pale new green and the meadowlarks were back in the south meadow. Adelaide wore a pale blue dress that Hester Pemberton had cut down from her own wedding dress of 40 years before. Her honey-colored hair was up in a low knot with sprigs of mountain heather pinned in. Her grandmother's cameo was at her throat. She carried a small bouquet of yellow wildflowers Jonah had ridden up the creek that morning to pick. Caleb stood at the altar in the gray coat that was the only good coat he owned. Freshly brushed by Silas's hands, he had cut his hair, he had trimmed his beard. The whiskey eyes did not waver for 1 second through the entire ceremony. Silas Holloway stood up with him. Jonah Holloway gave Adelaide away because she had no father living, and because Jonah had asked once very quietly the night before if he might be allowed to. She had said yes, and she had cried a little when she said it, and Jonah had cried too, and neither of them mentioned it the next morning. Reverend Pemberton, restored briefly to his pulpit by the occasion, married them in 12 plain minutes. When the time came for vows, Caleb took her hands, and he spoke the words he had been writing in his head for a month. Adelaide Margaret Linwood, I have loved you through letters and through silence. I have loved you across a continent I had never crossed. I have loved you in the body of a brother I could not save, and in my own body that did not know how to say so. I will never lie to you again. I will never raise my hand against you. I will never let another winter find you cold. I will keep my promises to you for as long as I have promises to keep. So help me God, Adelaide answered. Caleb Holloway, I came west to be seen and you saw me. I came west to be useful and you let me be useful. I came west to find a corner of the world where I belonged and you gave me a whole house. I will love you when the work is hard. I will love you when the work is over. I will love you when we are old and the cottonwoods we plant this spring are taller than we are. So help me God. They were pronounced man and wife. The whole town was there. Mrs. Wallace from the dry goods store sat in the third pew on the left and dabbed at her eyes with a square of muslin. Mrs. McKenna and old Angus sat in the second pew on the right, holding hands like newlyweds. Hester Pemberton sat in the front, beaming. The schoolmistress and her 14 students filled the back rows. Cornelius Vance was not present. Beatrice Vance was not present, having departed 2 months earlier to live with her aunt in Sacramento, where in time she would meet a young attorney who would understand her better than any frontier homesteader ever could, and where she would be, at long last, content. In the December of that same year, on a blustery cold afternoon when the snow was again driving down out of the North Adelaide Holloway, gave birth in the upstairs bedroom of the Holloway house to a healthy boy. The doctor did not arrive in time. Caleb delivered him on the floor by the bed, with Hester Pemberton on one side and Mrs. McKenna on the other, and the first hand the boy ever felt was his father's. They named him Owen Eli Holloway after the uncle he would never meet and the grandfather he would never meet, and they swore at his christening that he would grow up knowing every story. Time passed. It always does. In 1877, Silas Holloway married a schoolteacher from Sacramento named Cordelia Brooks, who arrived at Pine Hollow on a stagecoach in the spring of that year, and who proved to no one's particular surprise to be exactly the woman Silas had been waiting for. They had 3 children in 5 years, and Silas built a new wing onto the small cabin behind, and Cordelia opened a one-room schoolhouse in a corner of the South Meadow, painted pale yellow with a small brass bell on the roof that became in time the only school in 20 miles. In 1878, Jonah Holloway married Rosalie McKenna, the daughter of Old Angus, on a hot July day with the cottonwoods in full leaf. They had 5 children, eventually 4 boys and a girl, and Jonah, who had been the wild one in his youth, became, in the way that wild ones often do, the steadiest father in the valley. In 1879, Adelaide Holloway gave birth to a daughter whom they named Lillian Margaret Holloway, after a woman who had been loved twice and lost too soon, and after a mother who had crossed too far to be reached. Lillian grew up sturdy and clever and stubborn and went away in 1899 to study medicine in San Francisco, where she became, in due course, the first woman physician in the Upper Sierra. She came home every Christmas and walked up to the small clearing behind the barn to lay a wreath on the grave of the uncle whose name she carried half of. In 1881 came another son, Henry Caleb Holloway, named for Adelaide's father, who had died on the railway when she was 6. Henry was quiet like his uncle Silas and grew up to manage the Holloway place and never wanted any other life. In 1884 came Adelaide's last child, a daughter named Eleanor Rose Holloway, named for the grandmother who had set aside 50 shares of railroad stock at her christening that no one in the family had known about. Eleanor was a poet from the day she could speak, and she would in due time write a small book about her parents that would be quietly cherished in the valley for as long as anyone there could read. The Holloway place grew. By 1890, the homestead held 400 acres. By 1900, it held 800. There were 300 head of cattle on the South Range. There was a milking parlor and a smokehouse and a new barn taller than the old one. There was a small library Adelaide had built with money from her grandmother's last railroad dividends set up in Hester Pemberton's old cottage when Hester died in 1880. The library had a brass plaque by the door in Hester's name. Adelaide ran it 2 days a week for 30 years. Pine Hollow grew too. By 1900, it was a town of nearly 1,000 with a new bank that did not bear the Vance name, a proper post office, a doctor's office where Lillian Holloway practiced when she came home in the summers, and a Methodist church with 2 ministers and a real pipe organ. Cornelius Vance had died in 1885 of a stroke in his office alone among his ledgers and was buried with quiet honor and not much grief. On a cold November afternoon in 1900, 24 years after the wedding at the Little Methodist Church, Caleb Holloway sat in his rocking chair on the front porch of the house he had built in 1867, and his wife Adelaide sat beside him in a chair that had been hers since the first month she came west. He was 55. There was salt in his beard now and salt in the hair at his temples, but the whiskey eyes were the same. The 2 crooked fingers of his right hand had never quite straightened after the night he rode for the doctor at Hangtown, but he could still hold a coffee cup in them, and he still held one now. She was 48. Her hair, still mostly honey-colored, was held up in a loose practical knot. Her grandmother's cameo was at her throat where it had been for 25 years. She was knitting a small sweater for her young grandson and another for the second grandchild, Owen, and his wife, expected by spring. In the south yard, 3 of the younger Holloway cousins, the children of Silas and of Jonah, were chasing each other through a drift of last summer's wildflowers, gone to seed, their laughter carrying clear up to the porch. Owen, who was now 24 and had become an attorney in Pine Hollow, had brought his small son Caleb up for the day. Lillian, who was 21, was in from San Francisco for a week and was sitting on the porch step at her father's feet. Henry, who was 18, was out somewhere with his uncle Silas mending a fence. Eleanor, who was 15 and writing a poem about a stagecoach that fell off a cliff, was up in the loft of the barn pretending nobody could find her. Caleb set down his coffee. 25 years today, he said. Today. She looked at him. What do you mean today? 25 years today since I sat all night by a fire in a cave on the spur. She thought back. She counted. She nodded. You are right. I had not realized. I have realized every November the 18th for 25 years. She smiled. She reached over and laid her hand on his, on the arm of his rocker. You never told me that. Some things a man does not tell. He just remembers. The wind moved through the cottonwoods by the creek. The dogs lay on the boards at her feet. The grandchildren shouted. Adelaide, Caleb said. Yes. Do you ever regret it? Coming. The whole long bad business of it. The letters and the lie and the cliff and the cave and the bank. She was quiet for a long while. She let her knitting rest in her lap. She watched the children running. Caleb Holloway, I came west invisible. I came west to escape a city of 1,000,000 souls who had not seen me in 23 years. I came on a half thought and a torn page and a stranger's promise. I came expecting a husband and I got 3 brothers. I came expecting a marriage and I got a life. I came hoping to be useful and I have been more than useful. I have been seen. I have been loved. I have been at home. I have been a mother and a wife and a librarian and a teacher, and I have buried friends and held babies and read poems aloud at every Christmas of every year of this long, good marriage. So no, my love, I do not regret it. I do not regret 1 mile. He took her hand to his lips. Welcome home, then. I have been home since the second letter, Caleb. The storm that night turned out to be a quiet one. By supper time, it was hardly a storm at all, only a fine, soft snow drifting down through the cottonwoods. The grandchildren were called in for stew and cornbread. Owen and his small son sat with Lillian and her grandparents at the long table, and Silas and Cordelia and their 3 children came over from the cabin behind for cake, and Jonah and Rosalie came up from their place down the lane with their 5, and the long table that had once been hewn for 4 men sat 14 Holloways that evening, and there was not a quiet seat among them. After supper, supper, after the dishes, after the grandchildren had been bundled into the loft to sleep, Caleb walked Adelaide out to the porch in her shawl, and they stood there together looking at the south meadow under the blue moonlight. The mountains rose pale and silent above them. Far up there, miles and miles into the high country and 25 years into the past, on a granite bend in the road they had not traveled in many years, a place called Widow's Ledge still sat above the canyon, and somewhere along its lip an iron stake the brothers had driven in 1875 still held. It had held against 25 winters. It would hold against 25 more. Caleb, Adelaide said softly. Yes. Take me to bed, my love. The fire is dying. He did. The door closed softly behind them. The lamp went out a few minutes later. The house settled. The dog sighed on the porch boards. The snow fell. And somewhere at the edge of where memory and mountain meet, a man named Owen, who had died young in a stand of timber, was sitting in the gold afternoon of his last summer with a folded paper on his knee, smiling because he had known all along. Thank you for sitting with me by the fire tonight. If the story of Adelaide Linwood and the Holloway brothers has touched your heart, please take a moment to like this video, to subscribe to this channel for more frontier stories of love and survival, and to leave a comment telling me where in the world you have been listening. I read everyone. Until next time, stay warm, keep your promises, and remember, a good man keeps his word. Winter always ends, and home is wherever someone is waiting at the door for you to come back.